Forgotten Soldier, Guy Sajer, page 319, chapter 12, part 4. I and my comrades were wakened just before nightfall. With pounding hearts, we ran to our forward positions. The Russian tanks were rolling through the storm, and we could feel the vibration of their treads against the frozen ground. Our anti-tank gunners and men with Panzerfausts kept their eyes glued to the telescopic sights, which they had to wipe continuously. A few anti-tank trenches had been dug, but these were ludicrously inadequate both in number and size. We knew that if our anti-tank defenses gave way, we were lost. And we nervously clenched our fingers around the anti-tank grenades and magnetic mines which had been distributed. Wiener calmly steadied the butt of his FM against his shoulder, and I felt myself stiffen with 1,000 indescribable tears. Flashes of yellow light burst against the lead tank in the group of T-34s, whose turrets were pointed toward our line. 5 shells had already left white traces on the huge machine, which otherwise appeared to be unaffected by the efforts of our anti-tank gunners. To the north of us, an SMG had just opened fire. The rumbling of tanks was louder than ever, but the tanks themselves were still invisible. To the north, fighting had already begun, and we could see flashes of light despite the thickly whirling snow and the rapidly growing darkness. Short bursts of anti-tank fire lashed the plain, producing a curious muffled echo. As the roar of tanks grew louder, we felt our lungs lift. Long flames ran the length of the horizon, while others rose vertically, illuminating at different levels the whirling masses of falling snow. Then the sound of tank engines in full acceleration shattered the night and our eardrums. 5 vaguely defined monsters loomed out of the darkness. Soon a tank was roaring past us at a distance of about 10 yards. We heard a howling sound, and a shell from a Panzerfaust burst against its side. The monster immediately reduced its speed, and thick black smoke began to seep from every joint, to be lashed to the ground by the wind. The hatches opened, clanging back against the heavy metal plates. We could hear shouts and cries, which were quickly drowned by a powerful explosion. The turret disintegrated, leaving fragments of human beings suspended from the shattered metal in colors ranging from purple to gold. But there were no cries of triumph from our position, only the barking voice of our pack. One of our shells hit a joint in the back of a second tank, and it too began to pour smoke. Then the cartridges were running through my fingers. Everyone who escaped from the immobilized tank was shot down without mercy. For a moment, we breathed more easily. By now, our surroundings were lit by flames, and we were able to see the Russian tanks before they got so close. One of them had actually crossed our lines, and as it drew near us, we could feel our hair stiffening with terror. The anti-tank crew were working as fast as they could. Within 3 seconds, their gun was facing this new threat, and a shell, fired at the earliest possible instance, was bursting against the enemy's front apron. At the moment of impact, the engine stopped, and then began to scream as if thrown out of gear. Simultaneously, somewhere to our right, we were aware of 2 brilliant flashes and heard a long, drawn-out explosion. Another tank began to fire at us, and large pieces of frozen earth hurtled into the air. I no longer knew what was happening. The tank to our right burst into flames, groaning at all its seams. "For der Panzerfaust, Sieg Heil, Heil!" someone yelled. Our gunners were now firing at the second tank, which had penetrated to our rear, and which seemed to be having mechanical difficulties. Then its left side disintegrated in a prolonged explosion. But our attention was drawn to a hallucinating spectacle farther to the rear. A T-34 had driven over one of our positions, crushing our men under its treads. One of our half-tracks, armed with an anti-tank machine gun, was chasing it from behind, firing as rapidly as it could. Our anti-tank crew were in trouble. Freivich was wounded, perhaps even dead. We fired our machine guns at the Russian monster, which never slackened its speed, but continued to make for its lines as fast as possible. 2 shells fired by other tanks exploded beside our half-track, and a third disintegrated it right in front of us. But the enemy tank, believing it was still pursued, vanished into the whirling snow. The Russian armored assault was over. It had lasted for about half an hour, and had clearly been testing our defenses. A certain number of tanks had been disabled or destroyed. Their losses were visibly greater than ours. Unfortunately, those losses counted for nothing compared to the vast armada regrouping opposite us. For us, although quantitatively our losses were smaller, the destruction of 4 anti-tank positions in our sector was extremely serious. For the moment, the tension dropped somewhat. Trench telephones rang, asking for reports, and voices shouted for the stretcher bearers who were running and sliding across the icy ground. The veteran slid to the bottom of our hole and lit a cigarette, despite the ban. Hals jumped down and joined us. "I just heard Vice-Riedau's bunker was crushed by T-34, he said, gasping. We gaped at him, waiting for more information. "Stay here," the veteran said, finally. "I'll go and see." "Achtung! Zigaretten!" warned Hals. "Danke." The veteran extinguished his butt and tucked it into the cuff of his sleeve. He reappeared half an hour later. "We had to dig for 10 minutes before we could get Vice-Riedau out," he told us. "He's all right, and so are the other 2 officers. Just a few scratches. But the fellow from Liaison outside was killed. He must have panicked and tried to get inside. We found his body in the rubble." We quickly suppressed that mangled vision to rejoice that our Hauptmann was safe. We all felt very attached to him and dependent on his survival. By next morning, the snow had stopped. The plain was strewn with the carcasses of wrecked tanks, which the storm had not entirely covered, at least 20 in the immediate vicinity of our position. Parts of these huge black cadavers, still warm from the fires which had burned over and through them, had turned red in the intensity of the flames. It seemed that the Russians had attacked our line at 4 points, separated by intervals of 15 miles. One of these had been centered directly on our position, which was held by 6 companies. The other 3 were farther to the north. We went back into the line at 8 o'clock. Everything was motionless and muffled under a low, dark sky as opaque and heavy as a lead roof. Nowhere else have I seen skies quite like the skies of Russian winter. We used to stare up, amazed by the oppressive solidity. The diffused light seeping slowly downward made everything look unreal. Our reversible winter overalls stood out against the immaculate new snow of dingy piss yellow. A great many men were already wearing all the winter clothes we'd been issued. Coat, vest, sheepskin, which made their movements slow and clumsy. As the overalls had not been cut to cover so much bulk, they often tore. We looked like a collection of filthy, tattered pillows. Despite our sense of inferiority, we all felt much less tense. The carcasses of the Russian tanks looked to our otherwise pessimistic eyes like the slaughtered beasts of a triumphant hunting scene. We all knew that it had not been a serious attack. Nonetheless, we had managed to hold off the enemy's most dangerous machines. The possibility that the Russian tanks had been ordered not to advance any further occurred only to the veterans among us. All the younger men preferred to believe we had stopped them. A few bottles of alcohol theoretically reserved for wounded men were opened by the captain himself, and that evening we celebrated in the Ispas. In our hut, we particularly honored our Panzerfaust team. In the dim, wavering light of 7 or 8 candles, we drank to the healths of Obergeistreiter, Lenzen, Kellerman, and Dunty. Grenadiers Smellens and Prinz touched glasses with Hauptmann Weissreidau, who wore a large dressing on his left hand and 2 others on his face. There were also 2 men wounded lying on stretchers, to whom we gave as many cigarettes as they wished. Howells, exuberant as always, was describing the battle, miming certain scenes with swiping gestures of his left hand and arm, which held his glass, while his right he vigorously scratched his armpits, which swarmed with lice. Lindbergh, as always, when things were going well for us, was in a state of high excitement. Cowardice has affected him more than anybody else. And his face, although it looked as young as ever, bore the traces. Several men had fallen asleep, despite the noise. Everyone who stayed awake was soon quite drunk. As always at a German celebration, several fellows began to sing marching songs, because we knew hardly any others. In the shadowy light of the Ispa, the scene looked fantastic and unreal. The veteran began a Russian song. None of the rest of us understood him. We didn't know whether we were listening to a revolutionary song or a song from the friendly Ukraine, although the distinction no longer mattered as our Ukrainian days were over. Everyone was singing whatever he liked, as part of a continuously increasing uproar. Howells had been twisting my arm to sing something in French, and I obliged, despite a growing desire to vomit, adding the Sambre et Mousse in a series of more or less obscene songs to the general discord. Howells, who was tight as a drum, burst out laughing and shouted, "Here come the Franzosen to the rescue! Hooray! Puella!" Then something disagreeable happened. Lenzen stood up, stiff with drunkenness. "Who the hell is talking about the Franzosen? What can anyone expect from a bunch of lousy milquetoast like that?" He was shouting at Howells, who was dancing heavily like a bear. Howells grabbed him by the arm and tried to pull him into a waltz. "Shut up, you idiot! Go stick your head in the snow instead of belting out such crap." Howells, who was almost a head taller, went right into dancing. Then Lenzen let him have it with a fist, shouting at him louder than his minuscule superior of rank gave him any right to do. "Stillgestanden, Gefreiter," he yelled. "Who the hell do you think you are? Are you telling me to shut up?" Howells was trying to stare at Lenzen through eyes clouded by drink. "Stillgestanden," Lenzen repeated, "or I'll give you something you won't like. But you're forgetting sajer," Howells shouted, waving at me. By now he was purple-faced too. "He's half French, and he's lived in France all his life, and anyway, the French are with us now." He'd obviously been reading the same stories I had. "You damn fool, where the hell did you get that?" "But it's true, I read it in Ostfront." I no longer knew which way to look. "Wake up, you dumb cough. So what if a handful of those milksops have come over to us? It doesn't mean a damn thing, and anyone who thinks anything different is no better than they are. Goddamn back-haired guitarists whining over their goddamn love songs." I knew that Lenzen was talking about the fundamental discord which had always existed between South Germany and Prussia. "You're forgetting, Lenzen, that my mother grew up just outside Berlin." "Well, then you've got to choose. Either you're German like us, or you're one of those worthless, feckless frogs." I was on the point of saying that, after all, I didn't really have much choice. "And then you were asked to make just that choice in Poland. At Schmetz, I remember. I was there. But he did choose, and here he is, in the same boat as you and me and the rest of us. So, he doesn't have any more goddamn connection with the French." Lenzen, who was unquestionably brave, had been awarded the Iron Cross after destroying his 7th tank. I suddenly felt overwhelmingly depressed and vulnerable and incapable of ever attaining anything like Lenson's record. As always, I found the war almost totally paralyzing, probably because of my soft French blood, which Lenson despised so much. I was really almost as bad as Lindbergh. He wasn't a true German either, but came from somewhere near Lake Constance, one of Lenson's typical black hairs. A joyous group had begun to sing Marienka, and a general drunken revelry took over again. This time, though,